The blood had started again before dawn, seeping through the cracks in Natalie Preston's knuckles as she scrubbed a miner's shirt against the washboard in the dim light of her tiny shack behind the laundry house in Rhyolite, Nevada. It was 1907, and the boomtown was swelling with fortune seekers who cared little about the woman who cleaned their clothes, only that their collars came back white and their trousers free of desert dust. She was 22 years old, and her hands looked 50, the skin split and raw from lye soap and endless hours bent over steaming washtubs. The pain had become so constant she barely noticed it anymore, except on mornings like this when the bleeding started before she had even finished her first load. Natalie paused to wrap a strip of cloth around her worst finger, watching the fabric immediately darken with blood. She had been doing laundry since she was 16, after her father died in a mining accident in Goldfield, and her mother succumbed to pneumonia the following winter. Laundry was one of the few respectable jobs available to a young woman alone in a mining town, and she had thrown herself into it with desperate determination. 6 years later, she owned nothing but this shack, a few changes of clothes, and hands that would not stop bleeding. The sun was climbing over the Bullfrog Hills when she carried her first basket of wet laundry out to the lines strung behind the main laundry house. The October air was already warming, though the nights still carried a sharp chill. Rhyolite was barely 3 years old but already boasted electric lights, concrete sidewalks, a stock exchange, and nearly 8,000 residents. The town sprawled across the desert valley with an air of permanent prosperity, though Natalie knew better than most how quickly boomtowns could go bust. She was hanging sheets when she heard the horse approach. She did not look up immediately, accustomed to men riding past without acknowledgement, but this rider stopped. When she finally glanced over, she found herself meeting the gaze of a man astride a handsome buckskin gelding. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of desert sage. He wore the practical clothing of someone who spent his days working, not the fancy suits favored by mine speculators and stock promoters. "Morning," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. "Morning," Natalie replied cautiously, reaching for another sheet. The movement made her wince as the cloth wrapping on her finger immediately soaked through. The man swung down from his saddle with easy grace. "Name is Thomas Zimmerman. Most folks call me Tom. I run a small ranch about 5 miles north of town." Natalie had heard of him. In a town obsessed with gold and silver, Tom Zimmerman was one of the few who had chosen to raise cattle and horses instead. People spoke of him as either foolish or uncommonly practical, depending on their own fortunes in the mines. "Natalie Preston," she said, draping the sheet and reaching for another, though her hands were shaking now from the effort. "If you are needing laundry services, the rates are posted inside." "I can see that," Tom said slowly, his eyes on her hands. "But I came out here wondering if you might be interested in different work entirely." Natalie froze, the sheet clutched against her chest. She had received propositions before, always declined with as much dignity as she could muster. She felt her face flush with anger and shame. Tom seemed to read her expression because he held up both hands quickly. "Nothing improper, Miss Preston. I swear it on my mother's grave. I need help at the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting on in years and the work is getting to be too much for her. I have been looking for someone to assist with the cooking and managing the household. The pay would be $30 a month plus room and board in the small cabin adjacent to the main house. Mrs. Chen would be there as well, entirely respectable. $30 a month." Natalie made barely 20 on a good month from laundry, and that was before paying rent on her shack and buying supplies. But she had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too generous. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. "There must be a dozen women in town who would take such a position." Tom shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "Honestly, because I have been watching you work for the past 3 months every time I come to town, and I have never seen anyone with more determination. You are out here before dawn and still working after dark. That kind of dedication is worth something. And because Mrs. Chen specifically said she wanted someone young enough to learn but old enough to be sensible, you look like you fit that description." "You have been watching me," Natalie said flatly. "Not in a strange way," Tom said quickly, his ears reddening. "Just noticing. There is a difference. Look, I can see you are working yourself to the bone here. Your hands are bleeding through those bandages. Cooking and housekeeping is honest work, and it would not destroy your hands the way this does. Think about it at least." Natalie looked down at her wrapped fingers, at the blood seeping through the cloth. She thought about the endless hours over the washboard, the chemical burns from the lye, the way her back ached so badly some nights she could barely straighten up. She thought about winters washing clothes in water so cold her hands went numb, about summers standing over boiling cauldrons in heat that made her dizzy. "I would need to give notice," she heard herself say. 2 weeks, so Mrs. Hendricks can find someone else." Tom's face broke into a smile that transformed him entirely, erasing years of weather and hard work. 2 weeks is perfect. That will give Mrs. Chen time to prepare the cabin. It is not fancy, but it is clean and warm and has its own stove. "I do not need fancy," Natalie said quietly. "I just need honest work." "That I can promise you," Tom said. He remounted his horse with the same easy grace. "I will be back in 2 weeks to collect you and your things." "Dawn on the 15th, dawn on the 15th, Natalie agreed. She watched him ride away, dust rising from his horse's hooves in the morning light, and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it as hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of final laundry orders and quiet preparation. Mrs. Hendricks, who owned the laundry house, was sorry to see Natalie go but understood. "You have worked yourself half to death for me, child," the older woman said, pressing an extra $5 into Natalie's hand on her last day. "Take this and buy yourself some salve for those hands, and be careful. Tom Zimmerman has a good reputation, but a young woman alone with a man, even with a housekeeper present, well, people will talk." "Let them talk," Natalie said with more confidence than she felt. "I am tired of destroying myself for pennies." She packed her few belongings in a battered carpet bag her mother had brought from Missouri. 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, undergarments, a brush, a small tintype of her parents, and a book of poetry her father had given her for her 15th birthday. Everything she owned in the world fit in one bag. Tom arrived precisely at dawn on the 15th, driving a buckboard wagon rather than riding his horse. "Thought you might have more than a saddle could carry," he explained as he loaded her carpet bag into the wagon bed. He offered his hand to help her up onto the seat, and she noticed how careful he was not to grip too tightly, mindful of her damaged hands. The ride north out of Rhyolite took them across open desert studded with creosote and Joshua trees. The Bullfrog Hills rose to the east, their slopes marked with mine shafts and prospect holes. To the west stretched emptiness, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. Tom kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch. "I have about 200 head of cattle and 20 horses," he explained. "Not a huge operation, but it is mine, paid for fair and square. My father was a rancher in Texas before the drought of '93 wiped him out." He moved the family to Nevada thinking to try mining, but he never took to it. Died of a bad heart 5 years back. My mother followed him within the year. I took what little they left and built something that could last. Cattle and horses will still be needed long after the gold runs out. You do not believe in the mines? Natalie asked. Oh, there is gold here, no doubt about that, but I have seen too many boomtowns go bust. Rhyolite might last another 5 years or another 20, but eventually the ore will play out. Ranching is steady. It is not going to make me rich, but it will not leave me destitute either. His practicality appealed to Natalie, who had lived too long on the edge of poverty to trust in sudden wealth. They talked easily during the ride, and she found herself relaxing in his presence. He asked about her parents and listened with genuine interest when she told him about her father's love of books and her mother's beautiful singing voice. The ranch appeared almost suddenly, nestled in a small valley where a spring provided year-round water. The main house was built of wood and stone, modest but well constructed. A barn and several corrals stood nearby, along with 2 smaller cabins. Cattle dotted the slopes beyond, and Natalie could see several horses in a large paddock. An elderly Chinese woman emerged from the main house as they pulled up. She was tiny and wrinkled, but her eyes were sharp and assessing as she looked Natalie over. Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Natalie Preston, Tom said, helping Natalie down from the wagon. Miss Preston, Mrs. Chen has been keeping this place running since I built it. I would be lost without her. You are too skinny, Mrs. Chen announced, circling Natalie like a prospector examining ore. But you have strong spirit, I can see it. Good. Weak spirit is no use out here. Come, I show you cabin. Then we eat. Then I teach you everything. The cabin was indeed small, just 1 room with a bed, a stove, a table and chair, and a trunk for storage. But it was clean and tight, with real glass in the windows and a sturdy door that latched from the inside. After 6 years in a shack with walls that did not quite meet the roof, it seemed like luxury. It is perfect, Natalie said honestly, setting her carpet bag on the bed. Mrs. Chen nodded approval. Good. You are not spoiled girl who expects fancy things. I like this. Come now, breakfast. Your hands look terrible. I have medicine. Over the next weeks, Natalie discovered that life at the ranch was hard work but nothing like the brutal labor of the laundry. Mrs. Chen proved to be an exacting but patient teacher, showing her how to cook on the wood stove, how to make bread, how to preserve vegetables and meat, how to manage a household's endless tasks. The older woman also produced a tin of pungent salve that she insisted Natalie apply to her hands 3 times daily. Is old Chinese medicine, Mrs. Chen said. My grandmother's recipe. Will heal the damage but takes time. Your hands are very bad. Why you work until they bleed? I had no choice, Natalie said simply. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Now you have choice. Now you do better. Tom maintained a careful distance those first weeks, respectful and friendly but never inappropriate. He took his meals with them, and Natalie learned that he was not just the owner but worked the ranch alongside his 3 hired hands. He rose before dawn and often did not finish until after dark. Yet he always appeared for meals freshly washed and with his hat in his hand, as though entering the house was a privilege rather than a right. She found herself watching for him, listening for his step on the porch. He had a way of telling stories that made her laugh, describing the antics of stubborn cattle or half-wild horses with dry humor. He asked her opinion on things, too, treating her thoughts with respect. It had been so long since anyone valued her mind that she found it almost overwhelming. One evening in early November, after Mrs. Chen had retired to her cabin, Tom lingered at the table while Natalie finished washing the dishes. Her hands had improved dramatically under Mrs. Chen's care. The cracks healing and the bleeding stopped, though they would always bear the scars. "Can I ask you something?" Tom said quietly. Natalie turned from the basin, drying her hands carefully. "Of course. Why did you trust me? When I offered you this position, you had no reason to believe I was telling the truth. You could have thought I was trying to lure you out here for unscrupulous purposes, but you came anyway. Why?" Natalie considered the question carefully. "Because I was desperate," she said honestly. "But also because I watched your face when you saw my hands bleeding. You looked genuinely troubled by it. Men who want to take advantage of women do not care if they are suffering. They only care what they can get. You cared about my pain. That told me something about your character." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "My mother's hands looked like yours," he said finally. "Near the end, when my father was sick and money was tight, she took in washing to help make ends meet. I was 17 and working the mines, bringing home what I could, but it was not enough. Her hands bled just like yours. When she died, I swore I would never stand by and watch a woman destroy herself for pennies if I had the power to offer her something better. I have done well enough to keep that promise, at least this once." The vulnerability in his voice made Natalie's chest tighten. She moved without thinking, crossing to the table and placing her scarred hand on his. "You have done more than keep a promise. You have given me my life back. I will never be able to repay you for that." Tom turned his hand over, cradling hers gently. "I do not want repayment. I just want to see you smile more. You have the most beautiful smile, but you barely used it those first weeks, like you had forgotten how." Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I suppose I had forgotten. There was not much to smile about. And now?" Tom asked, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Now there is quite a lot," she admitted. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, neither speaking. Finally, Tom cleared his throat and gently released her hand. "I should let you rest. Morning comes early." "It always does," Natalie agreed, but she was smiling as she said it. Winter settled over the Nevada desert with surprising gentleness that year. The days remained mild, though the nights grew cold enough for frost. Natalie threw herself into learning everything Mrs. Chen could teach her, and the older woman proved to have a wealth of knowledge. She showed Natalie how to render fat for soap and candles, how to pickle vegetables, how to make medicines from desert plants. "You think you know hard work, Mrs. Chen said one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. "But laundry work, that is just suffering. This work, household work, this has purpose. You make home, you care for people, is different, better." "You are right," Natalie said, measuring flour for bread. "I feel useful now, not just worn down." Mrs. Chen gave her a sly look. "Tom, he watches you all the time. You know this." Natalie felt her face heat. "Mrs. Chen." "I am old, not blind," the woman said. "He is good man, you are good woman, both alone too long. I am just saying, I would not mind retiring fully, letting younger woman take over household." She winked. "We are just employer and employee," Natalie protested weakly. "For now," Mrs. Chen said with maddening confidence. "But I see how you look at him too, like sunflower following the sun." Natalie could not deny it. Somewhere between October and December, her feelings for Tom had shifted from gratitude to something much deeper. She found herself thinking about him constantly, looking forward to meals when they could talk, lying awake at night imagining what it would be like if he kissed her. It was both wonderful and terrifying. The week before Christmas, a storm rolled in from the west, bringing cold rain that turned the desert into a temporary wonderland. Tom came in from the barn soaked through, and Natalie immediately began heating water for coffee. "One of the horses is foaling," he announced, stripping off his wet coat. Should have happened during the day, but she decided to wait for the worst possible weather. I will be in the barn most of the night. I will bring you food and hot coffee, Natalie said immediately. You do not need to do that, Tom protested. It is miserable out there. Which is exactly why you will need hot food and coffee, Natalie said firmly. Besides, I have never seen a horse being born. If you do not mind the company, I would like to come. Tom's face lit up. I would be glad of the company. They spent the night in the barn, Tom attending to the laboring mare while Natalie kept the coffee hot and tried to stay out of the way. The birth was difficult, the foal positioned wrong, and Natalie held her breath as Tom worked with gentle, patient hands to help both horse and foal through the ordeal. When the baby finally slipped into the world, a perfect bay filly, Natalie found tears streaming down her face. She is beautiful, she whispered. Tom, exhausted and covered in sweat despite the cold, grinned at her. She is she not? Look at those legs, she is going to be tall. The filly struggled to stand, all gangly limbs and determination, and finally made it to her feet. Her mother nickered encouragement, and the baby began to nurse. Tom sank down onto a bale of hay, and Natalie sat beside him, both of them too tired and exhilarated to move. Thank you for staying, Tom said quietly. It means a lot, having someone to share this with. Thank you for letting me be here, Natalie replied. This was incredible. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain on the barn roof and the quiet sounds of horses settling for the night. Finally, Tom turned to look at her, his expression serious. Natalie, I need to tell you something. I know I am your employer and I should not speak out of turn, but I cannot keep this to myself any longer. These past months, having you here, they have been the happiest of my life. Not just because you are an excellent housekeeper or because Mrs. Chen has stopped complaining about the work, but because you are you. You are kind and strong and beautiful, and I find myself looking for excuses to be near you. If this is inappropriate, tell me now and I will never mention it again. But if there is any chance you might feel the same way, I would like permission to court you properly. Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Tom could hear it. You want to court me? More than I have wanted anything in years, Tom admitted. But only if you want that too. I will not pressure you. Your position here is secure regardless of your answer. I would never use my position to manipulate you into anything. Natalie reached out and took his hand, not caring that it was dirty from the birth. I would very much like for you to court me. In fact, I was beginning to fear I had imagined the way you looked at me. Tom laughed, relief and joy mixing in the sound. You did not imagine anything. I have been half in love with you since you stood in front of those laundry lines with blood soaking through bandages on your hands and still looked at me with such dignity and pride. I knew then you were someone extraordinary. I am nothing extraordinary, Natalie protested. I am just a laundress who got lucky. You are so much more than that, Tom said seriously. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her scarred knuckles gently. You are brave and resilient, and you have more strength in you than most men I know. Never diminish yourself. They stayed in the barn until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, hands clasped together like teenagers. When they finally returned to the house, Mrs. Chen took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. About time, was all she said, but her eyes were dancing with delight. The courtship progressed slowly by necessity. Tom was a proper man who insisted on doing things right. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings when weather permitted, always with Mrs. Chen's cabin in view, respectful of propriety. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers from the desert, a book of poems he thought she would enjoy, a new set of hairpins when he noticed hers were falling apart. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his hopes to expand the operation. Maybe add sheep, or even try growing alfalfa if they could improve the irrigation from the spring. Natalie shared her own dreams, smaller and more tentative. She wanted to learn to read and write better. She wanted to perhaps have a garden someday. She wanted a home of her own, a real home, not a shack or a cabin, but a place where she belonged. "You belong here," Tom told her one February evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "You have belonged here since the day you arrived. I hope you know that." "I am starting to believe it," Natalie admitted. In March, Tom asked her to accompany him on a trip to visit a rancher near Tonopah who had breeding horses for sale. Mrs. Chen agreed to chaperone, and the three of them made the journey north through landscape that varied from stark desert to surprising patches of green where water could be found. The rancher, a weathered man named Johnson, greeted Tom warmly and showed them his stock. While the men discussed horses and bloodlines, Mrs. Chen nudged Natalie. "He brought you to meet business associates," the older woman said. "This is serious. He is showing everyone that you are part of his life, part of his plans." Natalie watched Tom examining a handsome stallion, gesturing animatedly as he explained something to Johnson. Her heart swelled with love for this practical, hard-working man who had saved her from a life of endless suffering without expecting anything in return. That night, staying at a respectable boarding house in Tonopah, Tom asked Natalie to walk with him. They strolled through the town as electric lights flickered on against the gathering darkness. "I bought that stallion," Tom said. "It is a significant investment, probably more than I should spend right now. But I have been thinking about the future, about building something that will last." Johnson said the horse has excellent bloodlines, that his foals could command good prices. "It is a risk, but sometimes you have to take risks for things that matter." He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Natalie Preston, I am not a wealthy man and I probably never will be. I can offer you a ranch in the middle of the Nevada desert and a life of hard work. But I can also offer you my heart, which has belonged to you for months now. I can offer you partnership and respect and love for as long as I am breathing. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Natalie felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Tom pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious, and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Natalie felt like she was finally, truly home. They married in May at the small church in Rhyolite, with Mrs. Chen and Tom's ranch hands as witnesses. Natalie wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Tom wore his Sunday best with a string tie. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Natalie felt like her heart might burst from happiness. Mrs. Chen moved into Natalie's former cabin, giving the newlyweds privacy in the main house. "I am not so old I need to live in the house like a child," she declared. "Besides, you need space for babies when they come." Natalie blushed scarlet, but Tom just laughed and hugged the older woman. "We will see what the future brings, Mrs. Chen." The first months of marriage were an adjustment but a joyful one. Natalie had worried she might not know how to be a wife, having no mother to teach her, but Tom was patient and loving. They learned each other's rhythms, how to work together, how to navigate the inevitable small disagreements that arose. Tom taught her to ride so she could accompany him around the ranch, and Natalie discovered a love for horses she had never known she possessed. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Tom's investment in the stallion proved wise, as his foals commanded premium prices. The cattle herd grew steadily. Tom hired 2 more hands to help with the expanded operation. and Natalie managed the household with increasing confidence, even taking over some of Mrs. Chen's duties as the older woman slowly retired from the heaviest work. In the fall of 1908, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She told Tom one evening after supper, nervous despite knowing he wanted children. Tom's face transformed with wonder. "Truly, we are going to have a baby next spring," Natalie confirmed. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Tom swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully. "I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. We are going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Mrs. Chen fussed over Natalie constantly, making special soups and teas, insisting she rest more. Tom was almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work until Natalie finally told him she was pregnant, not fragile, and still perfectly capable of cooking dinner. Their son was born in April 1909, a healthy baby with his father's eyes and a surprisingly loud cry. They named him James, after Tom's father, and Natalie thought her heart might burst from the love she felt holding her child for the first time. Tom was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, staring at the baby for hours as though he was the most fascinating thing in the world. "He is perfect," Tom said one night, cradling his sleeping son. "Just like his mother." "I am far from perfect," Natalie said, but she was smiling. "Perfect for me," Tom clarified. "Perfect for us. I think about where we both were 2 years ago, and it seems impossible that we found each other, that a chance ride into Rhyolite could lead to this." "It was not chance," Natalie said softly. "It was fate. It had to be. Otherwise, none of this makes sense." The years flowed by with surprising speed. James grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child. In 1911, Natalie gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, a sweet-tempered baby who rarely cried. The ranch continued to thrive, and Tom expanded their land holdings, buying an adjacent property when it became available. Mrs. Chen remained with them, growing older but still sharp as ever. She doted on the children, teaching them Chinese words and making them special treats. "I never had grandchildren," she told Natalie once, "but these feel like mine. Thank you for sharing them with me." "You are family," Natalie said firmly. "You always will be." In 1913, as predicted by Tom years earlier, the mines around Rhyolite began to play out. The town's population plummeted as people fled to new boomtowns or returned east. Buildings stood empty, the stock exchange closed, and the electric lights went dark. Within a few years, Rhyolite would be virtually abandoned, a ghost town slowly crumbling back into the desert. But the Zimmerman ranch continued to prosper. Tom's practical vision had proven correct. While fortunes built on gold and silver vanished overnight, cattle and horses remained valuable. The ranch provided a stable, comfortable life for their growing family. In 1915, Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. The family mourned her deeply, and Tom ensured she was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a fine headstone to mark her resting place. "She saved me," Natalie told Tom as they stood beside the grave. "When I came here, my hands were ruined and my spirit was nearly broken. She healed both. I will never forget what she gave me." "She loved you like a daughter," Tom said, pulling Natalie close. "And she was so proud of the life we built together." More children followed. A second son, Michael, in 1916, and twin daughters, Sarah and Catherine, in 1919. The main house grew crowded, and Tom built an addition, adding bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The ranch buzzed with the chaos and joy of a large family. Through it all, Natalie never forgot where she had come from. Her scarred hands were a constant reminder of the woman who had scrubbed laundry until her fingers bled, desperate and alone. But they were also a reminder of the man who had seen her suffering and offered her something better, not out of pity but out of genuine kindness and respect. On their 15th wedding anniversary in May 1924, Tom presented Natalie with a gift. It was a painting, commissioned from an artist in Las Vegas, showing the ranch as it looked now, the expanded house surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, mountains rising in the background, cattle dotting the hills. "I wanted you to see what we have built together," Tom said. "From that first day when you trusted me enough to take a chance, to right now, this moment. All of this is because of you, because of your strength and courage and love. You made this home, Natalie. You made this family. I am so grateful for every single day I get to spend with you." Natalie traced the painting with fingers that were calloused now from different work, from kneading bread and gardening and holding reins, but no longer cracked and bleeding. "I am the grateful one," she said. "You saved my life." "We saved each other," Tom corrected gently. He pulled her close, and she settled into his embrace with the ease of 15 years of practice. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You gave me purpose. You gave me everything." They stood together watching the sun set over their land, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Their children's voices drifted from the house, arguing cheerfully about something inconsequential. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses nickered in the evening air. Natalie thought back to that October morning in 1907, standing in front of laundry lines with bleeding hands and no hope for anything better. She thought about the cowboy who had ridden up and offered her not just a job but a future. She thought about all the moments that had led from there to here, the small choices and large ones, the struggles and triumphs, the building of a life together. "What are you thinking about?" Tom asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About bleeding hands and second chances," Natalie said. "About cowboys and laundresses and impossible love stories." "Nothing impossible about it," Tom said. "We worked for this, both of us, every single day." "You are right," Natalie agreed. She turned in his arms to face him, cupping his weathered face in her scarred hands. "I love you, Thomas Zimmerman. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for caring when I was suffering. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." "Thank you for saying yes," Tom replied. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you, Natalie." "I always will." They kissed as the desert darkened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after the boomtowns crumbled and the gold ran out. Love, family, and home, the things that truly mattered. Inside the house, their children waited, and tomorrow would bring new work and new challenges. But tonight, they stood together under the vast Nevada sky, grateful for every moment that had led them here, to this place, to each other, to a happiness neither had dared imagine possible. The years continued to roll forward with steady purpose. By 1928, James was 19 and working the ranch alongside his father, already showing the same practical wisdom and gentle strength that had made Tom successful. Emma was 17, beautiful and capable, helping her mother manage the household and teaching her younger siblings. Michael was 12, wild and adventurous, always getting into scrapes but with a good heart. The twins, Sarah and Catherine, were 9 years old, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament, one quiet and thoughtful, the other outgoing and mischievous. Tom was 50 now, his hair silvered at the temples and his face deeply lined by years under the desert sun. But he was still strong, still vital, still the man who made Natalie's heart skip when he smiled at her across the dinner table. Natalie herself was 43, her figure fuller after bearing 5 children, her hair streaked with gray. But she moved with confidence now, secure in herself and her place in the world in a way the desperate 22-year-old Laundress had never been. One evening in late summer, with the children occupied elsewhere, Tom and Natalie rode out to the spring that fed their land. It had been Tom's habit for years to check on the water source regularly, and Natalie often accompanied him, treasuring these quiet moments alone together. They dismounted near the spring and sat on the rocks, watching the water bubble up from the earth with the same steady persistence it had shown for thousands of years. "You remember the night the foal was born?" Tom asked suddenly. "That rainy December night when I asked permission to court you?" "Of course," Natalie said. "I think about it often. That was the night everything changed." "I knew that night I was going to marry you," Tom admitted. "I knew it was probably too soon to be sure, but I was sure anyway. Watching you in that barn, so interested in everything, crying when the foal was born, sitting with me in the cold and rain just to keep me company. I thought, that is the woman I want beside me for the rest of my life." "I knew it too," Natalie confessed. "I was terrified because it seemed too good to be true. I kept waiting for something to go wrong, for you to change your mind or for the offer to be a trick somehow. It took me months to believe this was real." "It is real," Tom said firmly. 21 years now. 21 years since I saw you hanging laundry with bleeding hands. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had ridden past that day without stopping, if I had minded my own business. "Do not think about that," Natalie said quickly. "I cannot bear to imagine it. I would have worked myself to death in another year or two. My hands would have gotten infected, or I would have breathed too much lye or just worked until my body gave out. There was no future for me in that laundry. And I would have stayed alone," Tom said. "Probably would have married eventually out of practicality to someone suitable and lived a fine but empty life. We saved each other, Natalie. Neither of us would have had this," he gestured at the ranch spread out below them, "without the other. Partners," Natalie said, taking his hand. "Always," Tom agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of fire. After all these years, Natalie still found the desert beautiful, still felt grateful for this harsh land that had given her everything that mattered. "Mother, father." Sarah's voice carried across the distance, high and excited. "Come quick. James brought someone home." Tom and Natalie exchanged glances, both suppressing smiles. James had been spending increasing amounts of time in town lately, and they had suspected there might be a young woman involved. They rode back to find the family gathered on the porch. James stood with a pretty blonde girl of perhaps 18, her hand tucked nervously into his elbow. He looked proud and terrified in equal measure. "Mother, father, this is Miss Alice Harper," James said formally. "Alice, my parents, Tom and Natalie Zimmerman." "I am so pleased to meet you," Alice said, her voice soft but steady. "James has told me so much about you and the ranch." "All good things, I hope," Tom said warmly, shaking her hand. "Welcome to our home, Miss Harper." Over dinner, they learned that Alice's father ran the general store in what remained of Rhyolite's neighboring towns. She and James had met 6 months earlier when he went to buy supplies. They had been corresponding secretly ever since, afraid to speak up for fear of disapproval. "There is no disapproval here," Natalie said firmly. "If you care for each other and treat each other with respect, that is what matters." "James, why did you think we would object?" "I do not know," James admitted. "I suppose I wanted to be sure first, sure that what I felt was real." "And is it?" Tom asked gently. "Real, I mean," James looked at Alice with such open affection that Natalie felt her heart squeeze. "Yes, sir. I would like permission to court Miss Harper properly with the intention of marriage if she will have me." That depends on Miss Harper, Tom said, but he was smiling. Alice blushed but met his gaze. I would be honored to be courted by James. He is the finest man I have ever known. The family welcomed Alice warmly, and over the following months she became a regular visitor to the ranch. Natalie watched her son court his sweetheart with the same respectful care Tom had shown her years ago, and felt proud. They had raised their children with good values, teaching them by example what love and partnership should look like. James and Alice married in the spring of 1929, and Natalie could not help crying at the wedding. Her son looked so much like his father had at that age, standing at the altar with stars in his eyes as he watched his bride approach. "Our baby is married," she whispered to Tom. "First of many," Tom whispered back. "Better get used to it." He was right. Emma married a schoolteacher in 1931, a quiet, intelligent man who clearly adored her. They settled in Tonopah where he had a position, and Natalie missed her daughter terribly but took comfort in knowing she was happy. The Great Depression hit the country hard, but the ranch weathered it better than most. People still needed food, and cattle and horses retained their value even as paper fortunes vanished overnight. Tom and Natalie provided what help they could to neighbors struggling to survive, sharing food and offering work when possible. "We remember what it is to have nothing," Tom told their children. "We do not forget that. We help when we can because someone helped us when we needed it most." In 1934, James and Alice made Tom and Natalie grandparents for the first time, a baby girl they named Natalie in honor of her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake, Natalie was overwhelmed with emotion. "Look at her perfect little hands," she whispered, examining the baby's tiny fingers. "She will never have to work until they bleed. She will never know that kind of suffering." "Thanks to you," Tom said, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at their granddaughter together. "You broke that cycle. You gave our family a different future." "We did it together," Natalie corrected. "Everything we have, we built together." More grandchildren followed over the years. Emma had 3 sons in quick succession. Michael, who had grown into a serious young man, married a rancher's daughter and settled on land adjacent to the family property. The twins, as different as they were, both married well, Sarah to a veterinarian and Catherine to a merchant. Each wedding was a celebration, each grandchild a blessing. In 1945, with the Second World War finally ended and the country beginning to heal, Tom and Natalie celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a huge party at the ranch, with relatives and friends coming from across Nevada to celebrate. Tom was 70 now, his hair white, his movements slower. But his mind was sharp, and his love for Natalie burned as bright as ever. Natalie herself was 60, her body showing the wear of a hard-working life but her spirit still strong. They stood together in the center of the celebration, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and Tom raised his glass in a toast. 40 years ago, I married the bravest woman I have ever known," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "A woman who survived poverty and loss, who worked until her hands bled rather than give up, who trusted a stranger enough to take a chance on a better life. Natalie gave me everything that matters: love, family, partnership, purpose. She turned a house into a home and a lonely man into the happiest husband in Nevada. Here is to 40 more years, my love." "I will drink to that," Natalie said, her eyes bright with tears, "though you give me far too much credit. You are the one who saw past the desperate laundress to the woman underneath. You gave me a chance when I had none. You loved me when I felt unlovable. Everything good in my life traces back to that October morning when you stopped to talk to me at the laundry lines. You are my hero, Thomas Zimmerman. You always have been." They kissed to cheers and applause, and the celebration continued late into the night. Music and laughter filled the desert air, and Natalie thought about how far they had come from that desperate beginning. The decades had been kind to them in most ways, though they had known their share of sorrows. Mrs. Chen's death had grieved them deeply. They had lost friends to illness and accident over the years. The war had been a time of terrible anxiety, though thankfully their sons and sons-in-law had all returned home safely. But through everything, they had faced it together, drawing strength from each other. As the party wound down and their guests began to depart, Tom and Natalie walked out to the porch, seeking a moment of quiet. The desert night was clear and cool, stars blazing overhead in profusion. "You ever regret it?" Natalie asked suddenly. "Marrying a laundress with nothing to offer but ruined hands and a stubborn spirit?" "Never," Tom said instantly. "Not for 1 second of one day. You were never a laundress to me, Natalie. You were always so much more. From the moment I saw you, I saw strength and dignity and beauty. I saw the woman who would be my partner in everything. I saw my future." "I saw mine too," Natalie admitted. "I was afraid to believe it, but I saw it. I saw this life we would build, not the details but the feeling of it, the love and the home and the family. I knew you were my chance at something better." "We were each other's chance," Tom said. He took her scarred hand and kissed the knuckles tenderly, as he had done 1,000 times over the 40 years. "These hands built our home, raised our children, created everything that matters. They are beautiful to me." Natalie leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth, listening to his steady heartbeat. "I love you," she said simply. "More than words can ever express. You gave me back my life, and I have tried every day to be worthy of that gift." "You have been worthy every moment," Tom assured her. "You have been everything and more than I ever dreamed of. My partner, my love, my best friend, the mother of my children, the heart of our home. I am the lucky one, Natalie Preston Zimmerman. I have been lucky from the day you said yes." They stood together on the porch as they had countless times before, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Inside, their children and grandchildren settled in for the night, filling the house with life and love. The ranch spread out around them, built on hard work and determination, and the steady partnership of two people who had saved each other. Tom and Natalie would have many more years together, watching their family grow, seeing their grandchildren have children of their own. They would face the challenges of age together, supporting each other through illness and the gradual slowing of their bodies. And when the time came, first for one and then the other, they would pass knowing they had lived fully, loved completely, and built something that would endure long after they were gone. But on that anniversary night, with 40 years behind them and the future still unwritten, they simply stood together under the desert stars, grateful for the chance meeting that had changed everything, for the courage to take a risk on love, for all the moments that had led from bleeding hands and desperate hope to this, a life rich with meaning and overflowing with blessings. The laundress had been saved by a cowboy who offered her work that did not hurt, and in saving her, he had saved himself. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, proof that kindness and love could transform lives, that second chances were real, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with the simple act of seeing someone else's suffering and choosing to help. Their love story would be told to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations, a reminder that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, and that true partnership means lifting each other up, seeing each other's worth, and building something together that neither could have created alone. From bleeding hands to blessed life, from desperation to devotion, from strangers to soulmates. Tom and Natalie's journey was complete, a testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring strength of two hearts joined together in purpose and affection.